something you learned? Were you born an entrepreneur?
You got to start small.
I have not allowed being a woman to hold me back.
Credibility is not just making money, it's about making sure that people trust what you're doing.
Law practice is not only about going to court, it's about advice.
It's very difficult to hire somebody who's not motivated and then make them motivated.
One of the things that I'm known for is integrity.
They have to see you as a person of integrity.
Welcome to the Executive Lounge. I'm Youre Adam. Welcome to the Executive Lounge with me and Youre Ado. This is your business thought leadership program that brings you nuggets of insights from the lives and work of men and women who have scaled the daunting heights of either starting their own business or managing and growing institutions right here at home and around the world. My guest today on the show is an international business leader, and she has passion for STEM and the female empowerment. Girls and women alike. And until recently, she was the CEO, one of only a handful of women. In fact, at a period where there was a majority female, if you would say, dominance in the leadership, the helm of the mobile network operators in the country, she ran Airtel. And so you know by now, my guest is Lucy Quist, the author of The Bold New Normal. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and this has been long overdue, but perfectly timed.
Absolutely perfectly.
timed. How is life in the UK?
Life is good. You try to, as a leader, try to make a difference wherever you go. So life is good wherever you find yourself. And also it's great to have the opportunity to build on some of the wonderful things I've learned and grown through in Ghana and other places on the continent.
Okay. I'd like to, hopefully I can quote this properly, or rather paraphrase John Quincy Adams. And he said, there's a quote attributed to him that says, if you can inspire other people to dream more, do more, learn more, and become more, then you're a leader. At what point in your life did you become aware of your agency and responsibility as a person to lead?
It's honestly, I think the conscious part of knowing probably happened a lot later, well into my 20s, I would say. I mean, I wasn't the sort of person who generally made a prefect and so on in school. However, interestingly, now that I understand what the agency of leadership really is about, I realized that actually it's something I'd been practicing for a long time. Now, it's hard, this debate about whether leaders are born or made.
Or made, yeah.
Either way, I think that some people have some traits already, but you still have to invest in becoming a really good leader. But when I look back, I realized that this idea of helping other people to learn more and become more and be more has been a theme throughout. So my dad always used to talk about one of my earliest school reports. I think it was like a nursery report. And the teacher had written something like, Lucy always likes to make sure she helps the other kids when she's done with her work, which I really didn't know. Like, if you ask me now why, I have no idea. But I think that desire to see other people also do more and do more for themselves has always been there. And perhaps that's the foundation of me becoming a leader in the proverbial sense. And that consciousness was many decades later.
Interesting stuff. So there's a possibility. And the reason I went to that quote is largely because he could be talking about anyone. He's talking about a set of actions that are rooted in a mindset or value system.
Yeah.
So the concept of leadership really is that we all can be, in fact, we all have an opportunity, if not a responsibility, to lead. Why then do we have this mindset or the belief that every time we talk about leadership, we're kind of always looking for these few select people who are sitting up there in some space, the Oga at the top syndrome?
Yeah. I have a feeling that we somehow confuse positional power and the leadership that comes from having that position with the true values and characteristics that create a leader and the behaviors you exhibit to be classed as a leader. So granted, when people have positional power, like being the CEO of Airtel or any other quote unquote big job that people see, you have a responsibility to lead, understood. But not everybody in a big position of power is actually a leader. I have actually encountered very senior people who, in my view, are not leaders at all. So it's not a given that just because somebody has a title, they're a leader. Equally, you don't need a title to lead, to be a leader. I always say to people that we all have a responsibility, first of all, to lead ourselves. And you'll be amazed at the number of people who do not lead themselves, sometimes their entire lifetime, right through to old age. They haven't led themselves. What they've done is followed a series of steps and done things that were prescribed, they assumed to be prescribed, but not taking the step back to say deliberately, what are the things I value? How am I influencing other people? How am I helping people to be more and do more? And even myself. Whereas you find other people who they've never held a big title, big position. You sit and you talk to them and you realize how deliberate they've been about leading themselves, how they've deliberately influenced the people around them to lead them, and how they've created other leaders without having a big title ever in their lifetime.
It's such a great example to give, about somebody who doesn't necessarily have to have a title to lead. And it just took me back into the home. And that's where we all start our journey into leadership. I've learned recently, over the years, that becoming a parent gives you an opportunity, or even interacting with children gives you an opportunity to be led, because quite often we prescribe what is right to children. And that places a certain responsibility on you to practice what you preach. And so children, in a way, influence our actions and our decisions because we want a certain outcome.
Yes.
So therein lies the two-way street of leadership, that you can lead, but you can also be led.
Absolutely.
Why do you feel that in our society, when there's a boss who's really cool with everyone, it strikes the team as surprising? Because the perception of the boss is not one that's cool and would come and sit in the lunchroom and eat lunch with everyone. How did we get to this point where we felt leadership has to always be about the person on a pedestal and that exclusivity?
I think it's a number of things. I suspect there's a cultural element to it, but I don't think it's entirely cultural. And when I say cultural element, we have this thing about, the nana, the chief, the boss. That has historically been our model of leadership, traditionally for a long time, that we translate into other areas. So there's an element of that. But I don't think it's entirely that, because I do believe that there's some nananum, some chiefs, some male and female chiefs who engage. There's an element of that. But I think perhaps what has played an even greater role, and I think it's more recent history than long-dated history, is that through some of our challenges and our economic twists and turns, we've also developed sort of a dependency mindset, which means that economic power is in the hands of a few, we believe. We don't fully feel empowered to access economic power. And so we place all of that hope and responsibility in the hands of a few. So I think there's a bit of a traditional element, but I think there's a more recent historical economic element that has driven us to this point. So we have translated some of the sort of savior mentality into leadership. So by definition, this person is all-knowing, all-being, but will also solve all my problems and do everything for me. And this has probably become even more of a definition of leadership than what you described as somebody who's empowering. No, this person has all the power to do, to fix, and to make me okay.
But really, the essence of leadership is to empower people.
Exactly.
So I'd like us to make some references, take some references from the book, The Bold New Normal. You talk very importantly about the role of the vision at the center of what defines a
Yes.
leader, and that having a vision is very important. Now, let's talk about Lucy's journey. Are you following the vision? Did you always have? How did you craft your personal vision, and how has that influenced how you've led or been led as you've been going through your career?
Yeah. No, really interesting question. So you mentioned a while ago about how everything starts with the family and it's the community and that's the unit. And I think long before I had the realization that you need a vision, my parents had engaged me in ways that had created a vision that I wasn't aware of at the time. So I always tell people that my mom's a dreamer. My mom always has this thing about, the world is open and you can do so much and you can be so much. So from my mother, I got this vision of there's nothing you can't do. And it's really interesting. To this day, I actually believe there's nothing I can't do because someone else is doing it. But I also have enough humility to recognize that I can do it. I just probably need training or to learn, right? So I know that most things you can learn and become them, but you're not it today because you don't have the skills for it, but you can acquire them. So my early visions were around this, you can become anything, dream. The other aspect of my vision that really empowered the dreaming was my dad, who just had this attitude of creating self-belief. It's just remarkable how they did it, because my parents are like everybody else's parents. They're not, they're not special. They're parents, And my parents, I wrote in the book, my parents aren't even city people. My parents didn't grow up in Accra and Kumasi. My mom is from a village near Nsawam, West, where she grew up and went to school. My dad is from a village near Ejisu. That's his district. He didn't grow up in Kumasi. So it's not that you can say they had some newfangled approach that they learned, but these are the two people who came together. And in doing that, what they did is create this environment where you believe in yourself, that you've got skills and talent and you can do things, but you also believe that out there is a world that you can engage and make sense of and do really well with. So I think they gave me that fundamental vision that drove me to lead myself. I think the much broader vision in terms of influencing others and leading beyond myself and creating other leaders, a major turning point for me that I talk about in the book was 1983. 1983 is when we arrived in Ghana. It was the worst. I mean, people say things are tough. Look, 1983 should never come back.
You should never.
Ever.
You felt it more than others, right? Because it was a massive culture shock.
It was a massive culture shock. My parents had been out of Ghana for so long, so they didn't have connections. In those days, you even needed connections to buy bread.
Yeah.
You needed to know people to buy bread.
It was an essential commodity.
It was an essential commodity, is what it was called. And for anybody watching who doesn't, especially young people, I take to them when they tell me, "Oh, you're 35, so you don't know what happened."
Yes.
To give everybody context, so 1983, the rains failed, so there was drought in Ghana. A million Ghanaians came from Nigeria because Nigeria said, "Oh, Ghana, you go home," or whatever.
Ghana must go.
Ghana must go. That was it. So that was a million, and we were in Nigeria, so we came with the Ghana must go people. And then, in addition, there were some sanctions on Ghana as well.
Well, I mean, we had just come out of the 1979 coup d'etat,
so we had sanctions as well.
Revolutionary time. So the sanctions plus the failure of the rain
and the million new mouths who arrived. It was just, and this was a time when people were eating even things like cassava substitutes and dying.
Yeah.
There's this leaf called boko boko. I don't even know what it's called in
spinach,
English.
Actually.
It's a kind of spinach, but
it's
it's not 100%. It's not the common one. So most people now don't eat that because it was a very slimy. And that was the okra substitute. And corn was food aid. Corn, so it was yellow.
Yellow, yeah,
like
that's
not
true.
Yellowish, yellow.
It
was called yellow corn. These are things we're living, and if you had access to these things, you're actually privileged. Oh, and we were cooking. Now I know the whole health food thing has come around again, but back then people were cooking with shea butter.
True.
You
couldn't afford to buy vegetable oil.
So for me, what this did to me was it gave me a sense of responsibility, and the vision it created in me was, I want to be part of the solution. Surely this is being managed by human beings. And honestly, I was a child. I had no clue what I was talking about. I didn't know the how, the when, the what. All I knew was that this must be the work of some human beings. And I'm one. I'm a human being. So surely, as I get older, I should be in a position to help. And I think the reason why I share this is that sometimes we also have to understand that our visions become fine-tuned as we go along. Maybe it may not all be formed at once because our experiences contribute to them, but it's not all formed at once. But what I realize is that my vision has grown, the foundation hasn't changed, but it has definitely grown. So I thank my parents for sowing those seeds that set me off on a path that recognized vision.
Let's mirror your childhood through your children.
Yes.
The thing I find as a young parent myself, you realize that there will be days that the kids will fail to comply, and and that just goes to demonstrate the flaws that as humans we will always have. And of course, so if you'd go back in time as a child, you would have failed at some point. What is the way to go? What would you recommend would be the best way to go to ensure that in times when one has failed to live by a certain value system, they're restored in a way that keeps them going? How do you manage the flaws and maintain the self-belief?
Yeah, I think it's important to actually take the time to recognize what your values are. And it's another leadership requirement. I feel that quite a number of people couldn't tell you what their values are. Right? Not the nuance, not the what everybody else is saying. When you sit down and think, what are your values? Right? We all have a long list. I have a top 3.
I think 3 is probably all you need.
Exactly. My top 3. Number 1 is integrity. I want you to know that you can trust me. If I give you my word, it's my word. If something changes with my word, I will let you know. If you give me something to do, I will get it done because I said I will get it. Integrity, truth, honesty, all that ties in with integrity. Number 2 is excellence. I have to always try and do my best. My best may not be the best there is. I accept that. But my goal is to always do my best. Always. So excellence. And the third one is generosity. None of us got here to where we are on ourselves. People talk about being self-made. Well, good luck to you. I'm glad you're self-made. Thank God for you. I'm not self-made. Yeah, exactly. I'm not self-made, not self-created. There's so many people who, some have made sacrifices, some have just come across me and taken interest and said, you've got something, I'm going to help you. There are things I want to teach, I want to groom you. Generosity, it's so important that I also invest in paying it forward to other people. It's not just what people have done for me in the past, people continue to do this for me. And so I value generosity because I know how far it's gotten me, how far I know it's going to take me further, and I want more and more people to come along as well. So your question was, what happens when you fall short? If you know what your values are, then you know when you fall short. And when you recognize that you fall short, you have to, in some cases, you fall short in ways where you pay a price. There are consequences. And I believe in consequences. If I fall short and there's a consequence to it, I should pay the price.
That's right.
Sometimes there aren't consequences, but you know in yourself, in your conscience, that you have fallen short. Whether it's consequence-based or not, you have to go back, retrace your steps, have the humility to say, mea culpa, I got this wrong. Figure out why you got it wrong, learn from it, and move on. And we all have different mechanisms. When I fall short, I can tell you, Insura, I can be upset for days. No, seriously. I could have, It's
the excellence in there.
I can have like a couple, more than a day, where I'm like, how could you, Lucy?
Well, you're just beating yourself.
Yes. And then when you're done beating yourself, you're like, okay, you're beating yourself now. Let's figure out how are you going to learn from this and not do this again? How are you going to be faced with this situation and have the consciousness of reminders to ensure that it doesn't happen again? And for me, that's how it works. So there's a period of mea culpa, upset, beating myself, but then there's a period of then turning around and saying, let's move forward.
Perfect. Well, we're going to be moving forward and exploring more about leadership and the whole deficit. And I don't want to call it about inclusion and diversity. It's a deficit. I think that we should have equity. And so we'll explore your thoughts on that in a moment. This is the Executive Lounge. We're taking a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you more with my guest, Lucy Quist. Welcome back. This is the Executive Lounge with me, Inshira Ado, and my guest, Lucy Quist. Before we went on the break, Lucy, I mentioned I'd like to get your thoughts on the leadership deficit. And when I say that, you know, well, in the history of our emerging communications industry, we only, I think between 2015 and 2017 or 18, we had more female CEOs in the sector than ever before. But in the boardroom, you still found there's more male than there are female. If you would look back at your own life and our society, what should we be doing to ensure that we have equal representation for both men and women, if not more women?
Yeah, really good question. And for me, the part I like most about your question is the contextual element in our society, because for every society, what will move people forward is different. This assumption that just because something is happening globally, it forcibly applies to us in the same way is, in my view, is not true. We have actually some very strong and powerful traditions which speak to the leadership and the responsibility of women. So I'm not naively saying that every form of our tradition or every tribe and every clan gets it, but we actually have some who really do. We've somehow bought into this notion, and some of it has been is an imported notion, because if you think of formal education outside of Ghana as it started in the West was started on the basis of boys go to school, and people literally said going to school will give women headaches. And so when formal education was brought to us, it came with its baggage. And again, we don't peel the onion to recognize whose baggage we're carrying. So we've had this external. Formal education was for boys, and eventually girls were allowed in. So already in school, we have a two-track system that we're trying to recover from and say girls should be included. When you look at us traditionally, we have some traditions, I agree, that put some women back, but we also have traditions that actually celebrate women, right? In the Akan tradition, the head of the family is the woman, right? And I feel that I personally benefited from that very directly. So my dad's big thing, which I was to realize later in life, was that my dad named me after his mother. And he treated it as literally his mother. So all the respect, all the empowerment, and the same applied to my siblings who are younger, being the oldest of them. His whole thing about you will lead, you will be in front, you will push, you will drive. He started from when I was very young. So they could be having an adult conversation, like we're talking, and they talk, and he'd go, let's see what Lucy thinks about this. And this is a little girl running around the house. And I'm sure half the time the things I said didn't make sense when you're 5, 6, whatever age you are.
But at least you had a seat at the table.
You had a seat at the table. So his view was, what do you think? Was his question. I'm not saying whether you're right or wrong. What do you think? So he made it normal for me to think and have an opinion. So in the context of women, we have a job to do to actually start very young to bring them on board. Instead of telling them when they're young that your life is defined and these are the things you're going to do and these are the things you can't do and these are the limitations that you have, we need to tell them that you're equal to any other human being. You're not better. We're all human beings who have different skills, abilities, backgrounds. We need to equally tell our sons the same thing.
That's right.
That you and your sister, your cousin, the girl in your classroom,
you're all equal.
You're all equal. We need to do the homework right from that stage, because what happens then is that these boys become decision makers. these boys become the people who could potentially mentor a woman who's come through a 2-track school system that needs somebody to help her go out.
And reinforce their
to
own
reinforce.
belief. And, yeah.
So we have to start young, shift that mindset belief, because honestly, we need everybody on board if we're going to move our economy, right? So shift that mindset, empower the girl to believe that she can, and create spaces for them in the workplace, in the school environment that says you can equally do everything. Because you want to pull, but you want the girl also willing to push. And if you're pulling and the girl isn't willing to push her way in, it doesn't work. It has to be a push and a pull for us to get there.
You know, you raise a very important point, the whole 2-track system. I went through what we call the old traditional secondary school system. I believe you did the same.
I did too, yes.
And you'd realize that, so I was in a mixed environment. So you'd find more females in maybe the arts and business class, and not so much in the accounting and the science class. But the females I found in the science class were not necessarily different from many of the females who were in the other classes. And they were brilliant. So it begs the question, what about the environments that these others came from that made them not believe they could be in the same class and do science? So the education system itself needs a bit of work.
Absolutely. So one of the burdens of education is that it assumes that certain subjects are harder. Children get told very young that certain things are harder. And harder and the fact that a girl is weaker don't go together. So you do the easier thing because this is too hard for you. And that the boys manage the harder things. If we change the narrative, actually, and we started saying arts was harder than science, the opposite would happen.
Yeah, everyone's going to move away.
It would happen. I heard of a country, and I don't want to name the country in case I get it wrong, but it's a country in Africa where people assume that it's more... it's harder to do arts and sciences for girls, and all their science people are girls. Wow. It's all about the narrative. So we do have this thing where there's a fundamental assumption that harder things to study are too hard for girls, and so the science and the STEM and so on, they should not be in that class. I remember one of my kids, my son actually came home one day, he was in class 1, and he came home out of the blue. Mommy, I can't do science. Mommy, I can't do science. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, I can't do science. And so I asked him, okay, fair enough. It's okay. I'm not, imposing science on you. You're in class 1, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
I said to him, are you breathing right now? He said, yes, I'm breathing. I said, do you know when you do science, they'll explain to you why you're breathing and how you're breathing? Really? I said, and you know how you love animals and pets, and they explain all of that to you in science? That's what they do in science. He's like, really? Today my son is a teenager. He's a science and math student. Right? I didn't say to him, you will do science and math. But all I was trying to achieve with that...
beautiful picture.
Yes, and all I was trying to do in that conversation, level the playing field. Don't start in class 1 with this negative burden of something you cannot do. Class 1, your objective is, I can do anything I choose to do. Yeah. What you choose to do in the end is fine. If he had chosen not to do science, I'd be okay. But I'd rather he chose not to do it because he doesn't want to.
But not because he's been told or believes he can't.
So it's so important that we level off this playing field and let people explore what they're naturally drawn to and are able to do, then put them in boxes and classes. So we can't talk about this only in the context of school. We have to talk about it in the context of the home. Yeah. I remember being in a conversation, a conference actually at Legon. And this had never actually occurred to me. It was about healthcare and it was about technology and how we could infuse technology. And this medical practitioner got up and he gave a speech. And what threw me in what he said was that he asked a question about who the primary healthcare givers are. And we all start thinking somebody with a medical degree or profession.
It's the mother.
It's the mother.
That's where it
Because
starts.
9 times out of 10, she's deciding whether this temperature is just a
It's-
mild
yeah.
thing, whether this thing I need to take you to the doctor.
There you go.
Do I need to dress this wound? The primary health care
So
is in her hands.
I'm hands-on as much as possible, but I must be honest with you. Looking back at the point of the primary health care giver,
Yeah.
I'm realizing that I get told how it was fixed. It's not. I don't get consulted on how it should be. I get told that, oh, he had a temperature, I took care of it. Oh, he has a temperature, I've done A, B, and C. Let's do the rest. So that's when I come in. So there's always
Yeah.
someone doing this,
Make a
and
decision.
she doesn't have a degree in medicine.
Exactly. So imagine if more girls were just empowered to understand just how the human body works, because many of them will go on to be somebody's mum.
Yeah.
They influence people. Even the food, I say to people, even the food you put on the plate for your family. How are you balancing the food there? How are you ensuring what's the right nutritional balance? So this whole notion that women, girls should sit out STEM, actually we need more of them in STEM.
Because we
so
need
many
them.
of, we need them because they influence our day-to-day, our social interaction.
You
our
make the world go round, and we don't want
And
you
so-
studying.
And so if they're clueless, we're in big trouble.
Well, we are. I'm sure it explains a lot of things around the
telling
world
you,
today.
right?
It's a very interesting perspective to look at
Mm-hmm.
it from, that there's so much expected of the woman,
Yes.
but we feel that the girl should be exposed to very little.
Yes.
But you can't, what you put in is what you get
You
out.
get out.
So how are we balancing the two? I'd like us to take the concept of leadership
Mm-hmm.
away from the home into the workplace. Let's just hypothetically believe that everyone has done what they need to do
Okay.
to believe in themselves. The family have reinforced who they are. They believe they can do anything. And they've developed the right value system to ensure that they're functioning as leaders. You're in the workplace. You meet different people.
Absolutely.
And from different backgrounds, their behavior and their approach to doing things differently, subscribing to different values and visions. How do you, in a space like that, maintain your personal goals and help other people come along with you?
Yeah.
And I'd want you to give me this, your thoughts on this from two perspectives. One from the senior most person in the business, and also as an upstart when you start at work.
I'll start from the upstart part. So I think one of my personal challenges through my career has been my expectations of leadership. And it took me a while to realize that, because sometimes I'd work in places and think something is not right. I'm not happy about something. And I ultimately realized that when I work in an environment, I want to see leadership I can believe in. It's a very simple rule. So as an upstart, I was always looking for, I'm not saying a leader that I would want to become, but a leader who would inspire me to believe. A leader who would make me feel that what we're doing means something, it matters. So it's become a theme with me that I need to see leadership. I need to see not just your positional power, I need to see your leadership in there. And I have found situations as a young person where I've had to lead people who are several positions ahead of me. And there's a knack to it, though, because if you're in a workplace and you're more junior and you're trying to lead, you're leading more through influence. You don't have the power to lead. Yeah. You can create the influence to lead. And they're two completely different things. And sometimes that leadership means correcting people. Sometimes that leadership means trying to direct, but direct in a way that's positioned around business benefit. So I remember being like 19 or 20. I was working in a factory. I started working very young, and it was during a break, and the supervisor, a little guy, I remember him, just came, and he was upset, and he was swearing, and he was being very rude. And I thought in my mind, well, first of all, you don't talk like that as a supervisor, and you certainly don't talk to me like that. So I still don't believe how I did this, by the way.
Okay.
I said to him, "Can I see you in your office?" He said, "Okay."
So you summoned him into his
I
own office?
summoned him into his office. I said, "Can I see you in your office?" He said, "Fine." We went to his office. I said, "You know what? I don't use the language you just used. I don't accept anybody talking to me like that. So please don't speak to me like that ever again." He looked at me and he said, "Can we wipe the slate clean and turn over a new leaf?" Right? Now, in that position, I could have immaturely just lost it or been upset or sworn back, blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to make my point, but equally, I wanted to respect his position and not embarrass him in front of everyone else. What I said to him in his office, nobody will know. The only people will know is who he chooses to repeat it to, because
right.
I did not repeat it.
Yeah.
But I thought it was very important that he understands that it doesn't work for me, and I don't think it's right for him anyway. So that's a form of your coming up. Another example, a number of years later, I was working in an engineering team, and we each had a part of the product we were making. And what I realized was that as a team and as a division, we didn't have anybody who had complete oversight end to end. So you're doing your bit, I'm doing my bit, he's doing his bit, she's doing her bit. But we don't have anybody who's saying, your bit, does it fit? Is it working well with me?
So someone who had the
Is your
bird's eye
timing
on the whole project.
So I went to my boss and I said, this is what I think. This is my observation. This is what I think we need. And by the way, we need to create a position for this, for someone to take ownership. And by the way, it's going to be me. Sorry.
So you spotted, you observed the challenge.
Exactly.
You provided a solution or a proposed solution.
And then...
And you went for...
Exactly.
So
at the time I was working for a lovely... And lots of these people, I haven't worked with them for like 20 years, but I'm still in touch with them. We're on Twitter together. These are people, long time.
Yeah.
One of them I had lunch with like a month ago, and he hasn't been my boss for 20 years.
Wow.
And this particular guy, he's an introvert, so he's not the kind of person who makes rash decisions. He wouldn't agree. So he said, "Okay, Lucy, let me think about it."
Yeah.
And when he said, "Let me think about it," he took the issue away. He spent a few days, and then he came back. And he said, "Okay, Lucy, we'll do this. I'll give you 3 months to demonstrate that this creates value. If it doesn't work out, you go back to your old position." I was like, "Fine.
Yeah.
That's all I need."
But that's a really wonderful story. I'm thinking, the cultural differences. I think that the best way to sum up the culture of leadership is to use the adage that abofram bon in both cases, you were in what would be the subordinate role, but you demonstrated leadership. One based on conviction, and two, the second example based on the desire to add value.
Yes.
Now, in both cases, I can see, and I've heard stories that are similar, where there's a pushback from leadership. What do you think could go wrong in situations like this? Could it be that more on the subordinate side, or is it a leadership flaw that makes it difficult for us to have spaces where junior members of teams can boldly say, "I think we're going the wrong way," or "I think things can be better if we did it this way"?
Okay, so now we're talking about this from the top down.
Yes.
So the two stories I shared about doing this from the bottom up is about also making sure that just because you have an idea, a bright idea that you think needs to be done, or just because you think you can correct someone, shouldn't make you falsely think that you're now the boss, or you're the senior, or you're over and above them. So how the tact with which you engage them is really important as a junior person.
Okay.
You need to respect that. Don't lose sight of that. Just because you have a bright idea. The bottom line is that person in that more senior position has access to more information, more insight, a broader view. So sometimes that suggestion you make may not fit in with a bigger picture, a bigger strategy that you're not aware of. Respect that. Take a chance. If you're handling it properly, take a chance. The worst thing that could have happened was he said no.
And you would have still been at your desk
I'll
doing
still
your
be
job.
at my desk. I'm just thinking of how better we could do things, right? And for me, it was an opportunity. But actually, what ended up happening is that all the departments ended up creating this position because it went well. Now, from the top down, you have to have invested in yourself as a leader to have the confidence, because I think sometimes when people push back, there's a sense of feeling threatened. I once worked for a boss who said to me that, Lucy, don't hire people that you're better than. Can you imagine?
Really?
Yes, he said to me, in every role that reports to you, ensure that the person you recruit to do that job can do it better than you can.
Oh. I can see some sense and value in that.
Because his point is that if you can do the job better than the person, you end up doing their job and you end up carrying them as a passenger. You have to be confident that everybody who works for you, better than you in that position, is giving you the best information, the best insight. Your job is to pull it all together. Make sure that they can do that particular thing better than you. Now, it takes a lot of confidence to look at, so if I use an example, working at Airtel, to look at your sales director and say, this guy knows sales better than I do. But for me, that was my goal. And in fact, the guy
because it made life easier for you.
So the guy who ended up running our sales division at Airtel was somebody who, as I tell people, I had learned so much about sales from when we worked 2 companies prior, right? And even though he was reporting to me, he knew sales. He's done sales all his life. So when he comes and he says, Lucy, this is the approach that we should take, I will ask the right questions, but I'm not sitting there thinking, this guy, what does he know about sales? Let me, Or another example, whether it's marketing, whether it's legal, whether it's regulatory, I have to know that you're a better lawyer than I could ever be because I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But if I feel that in my leadership weakness, everybody has to be weaker,
And you don't build a strong team.
The best analogy I like to use is, when you have a bridal party, there are 2 kinds of brides, right? There's the bride who thinks, let me pick my friends who are not so nice so that everybody will say I'm beautiful. Then there's the bride who will say, let me pick the finest friends I have. And what people don't realize is that the better your bridal party looks, the better you look.
True. Because it rubs off on you.
It rubs off on you. So top down, you have to have the confidence, you have to have the assurance, you have to be comfortable with people knowing more than you know. You have the broader, bigger picture. You have to be willing to draw out that greatness that they have, the great ideas that they have. Because I say to people, if hundreds of people are working in one organization, you don't want the ideas of one person. You have 100 or however many people, different ways to think that could actually enrich your organization and make it greater. So it's a hurdle, it's a challenge in our society because we still have a number of leaders who perhaps subscribe to that sort of vision of a chief and nana, somebody at the top who is all-knowing, all-being, all-mindful of everything. And so somebody else's idea is a threat. No, we need a society of numerous people thinking, sharing their ideas, bringing their ideas forward and enriching the workplace. That is what we need. Be confident as a leader.
Well, we're going to do a little bit more of that. We're going to take our final break. When we come back, the next 10 minutes, we're going to use that time to get practical steps to a bold new normal leadership.
Yes.
Stay tuned. This is the Executive Lounge. There's more on the way. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me and Shira Addo and my guest Lucy Quist, author, international business leader, engineer, lover of STEM, woman empowerment, you name it, and she's there. Lucy, this is the backstraight for our conversation, and I really would love for us to, reading the book, The Bold New Normal, there were quite a lot of insights, on how you believe we can become better.
Yes.
Better leaders, a better society, a better continent.
Yeah.
I'd like you to share with us some of the practical things that you think the future requires for us to do if we want to see this continent grow.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And you know, in writing The Bold New Normal, I actually started out wanting to write purely about leadership and what people should do about that, and that will be a subsequent book. But I ended up writing The Bold New Normal because I realized that contextually, what we actually need is leadership that drives change. What we all want, that we have in common, is that we want our country and our continent to change. So then what do we need to do as leaders to change it? And that's kind of the premise of the book. And one of the things I talk about very strongly and early in the book is that, first of all, we need to even understand the situation we find ourselves in. The situation we find ourselves in is a lot more dire than we realize. It's a lot more urgent than we realize. Thank God we're not all running around sort of, and, you know, most of us find food to eat day to day. I'm not saying everybody does. Even in Ghana, we still have a poverty rate where people can't get food every day.
That's right.
But we're a lot better than where we used to be. But we're the urgency is around the fact that today the fundamentals of life, healthcare, education, access to a job so people can self-actualize, we all just want to do what human beings do, are not guaranteed. Given our current population, the problems that we have today will only become worse as our population explodes.
True.
There are 1.2 billion Africans today. 1 billion in sub-Saharan Africa. The estimate for 2050 is double.
Yeah.
Not a long time, one more generation and our number doubles.
Yeah. And that puts us in a place where 3 of every 5 young people on this earth will be on this continent.
Yeah, because actually that extra billion people that we will bring forth will be half of the population growth in the world. So half of the new human beings coming will be African. Which means that we have a challenge where if you have systems and support that doesn't entirely meet the needs of people today, as the population grows, that becomes worse. So our leadership mindset has to be very much about driving change. We need to, so first understand the big picture. This is the people dynamics we're talking about. Then understand the economic dynamics. One of the big pointers I like to bring out is, and it's in the book, is that we account, or we're given credit for, only 3% of global GDP. Right? We are about 14% of the world's population.
That's right.
And we're only 3% of GDP. The math I don't even need to do the math and
Yeah,
tell you.
it's evident.
It's self-evident.
Yeah.
You know, our GDP contribution as a continent is calculated as being much less than individual countries in other parts of the world. So fundamentally, the whole picture isn't right. So we need to understand the context, understand what the implications could be if we did nothing, and then quickly get into action of doing something. And I talk about some of the narratives that support our current situation that invariably keep us there because even we believe them, we have bought into them. What we need to do is take a step away from the current narrative and the current situation, step away from our hunger and our survival, because what this situation has created in us is very much a survival mentality,
so
a
everything
desperate
is just
mentality.
very short-term in how we go about
Short-term,
it.
desperate, and even in leadership, we end up thinking short-term, desperate, feeling threatened by anything new. Step away from that and say, what is the future Ghana, the future Africa I believe is possible? I want to see. Back to our earlier conversation on leadership and vision.
That's right.
What is the vision of the future? Saying that we want every child to have access to good education at every age. And I remember I said good, and I should add high quality education. Yeah. Education that brings out the best and the most in the human being, not just for the Ghanaian child, because we can't do this in our isolation, but we actually start to have leadership that thinks in a joined up way that says, actually, I want the best for every African child across the continent. How do we ensure that? How do we ensure that every child, and not just child, but every human being has access to good healthcare? Healthcare that ensures that little things, minor things are not fatal. How do we ensure that we're producing the jobs, the right volume of jobs to support people? So this is about creating a vision. And I've articulated in very simplistic terms because those are things that we can all relate to. They're simple things. You can articulate it into a grander vision that says, so for instance, I think Rwanda is very much on we're building a knowledge economy. That's a big picture that's going to drive everything else you do. And ultimately, it will give better healthcare, it will give better education, it will create jobs. That's a bigger way of articulating it. Right. I'm articulating in ways that people can relate to. Now, if we, and we should articulate these new visions, and I think country by country, we need leadership that will do this, that's right. Then, Ishra, you and I, who are not the people maybe in those jobs, let's say we're just the people who meet other people and we interact in our everyday lives, we have to take those visions and translate them into language. Translate them into our everyday day language so that when you walk down the street and some child who doesn't look the part, they look rather rough because of today's situation, but actually that child tells you, one day I'm going to be an engineer, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to cure this, don't turn around and say to them, who do you think you are? Don't turn around and say to them, look at you, how on earth do you think you'll get there? Say to them, that's great. Because you have a vision of the future. Right? Let your language support the vision. Don't have a vision, you want everybody to have healthcare, and at the same time constantly tell, oh, but the doctors, they are no good. No, if a doctor makes a mistake, point it out and have it corrected. But celebrate the ones who are doing the great job. Let your language support your vision. Because if our language starts to support those visions, invariably our mindsets change. Mindset is really driven by the things you hear and see every day. If you believe and everyone if you're a little child and the adults around you say, oh, you're not going to amount to anything. And they're just saying it, so they haven't said, they haven't dictated your future.
Sure, later you believe that you're not going to amount to anything, so why bother
Even my mother said it.
Yeah, so I'm not going to bother.
Right? So people underestimate how powerful language, words, what we say, that what it does in the mind, people completely underestimate it. But if we can reinforce vision with language, like really language that we believe in, that every time we meet someone, we're building them up. Inshallah, this was great, we can do more. This was great, we can take it to another place. That child can do something even more. That person, as you shift that mindset, their behavior changes.
Of course, because if they believe they can do more, they will do more.
Their behavior starts to change. Because I now live in an environment where I keep hearing that it's possible. It may not be there today, but it's possible. Yeah. And if I can keep it, so what am I doing? I'm going to behave differently. I'm going to reinvest my time properly. I'm going to make sure that I stick to a certain path. If I make a mistake, I'll pick myself up and I'll retrace my step. That is about being bold. So you see, choosing the title, The Bold New Normal, was very deliberate because my point was that today we have a normal. Our normal isn't good enough. Our normal today is taking us down a path that we don't want to go. You and I shouldn't want to go down that path. We don't want to go to a path where our systems are strained, our healthcare is even more strained, people are desperate, people don't have food to eat. So we don't want that. We equally don't want a normal that says we are less than, that we're inferior. This is currently our normal. We have to understand the reality of our normal today and boldly
look for a new one and create it.
Exactly. Boldly deliberate, because ultimately what I'm saying with the bold new normal is that the ultimate goal, with all these examples I gave around the vision, the ultimate big vision that I see is that Africans and Africa must prosper.
That's good.
And prosperity isn't money in your pocket today. It is not counting cash. Prosperity is the assurance that when I wake up tomorrow, I'm not worried about food. I'm not worried that if I have a bruise, I can't go to it. Prosperity means that it's wealth that continues. Prosperity isn't riches as in riches for today.
That's right.
Prosperity is knowing that my unborn grandchild has a fighting chance. That is prosperity. So for me, that is the big vision. But if I start off and I just say prosperity, we all have so many different interpretations. And if I don't explain it, people will be like, yeah, she thinks everybody can be rich. Not everybody can be rich. No, I'm saying you have a right as a human being to live a decent life. And for me, this is a leadership responsibility because it's something we have to drive from the top down. We have to want, our citizens have to feel that they can and should want these things, but the execution of it has to be driven by a vision that starts from the top and feeds down and drives us all forward. We can prosper. We have built industries. We have built other countries through our own hard work, through our resources, through what we have to offer, our time and our energy. It's now time for us to boldly do it for ourselves and create a bold new normal where every African has the opportunity, the right conditions to prosper.
Well, you could have said that better. Thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you for having me.
That's how we end today's show. But don't worry, I still have my 5 takeouts from this conversation. Number 1 is you must have a vision. You can't do anything just, in fact, the simple ability to dream of a new normal requires that you have a vision. How do you want that new normal to be? In that vision, you will then distill your value system and all the things that make it possible. Number 2 is that you must be bold. You know, I think that there are lots of people who would agree that their lives could be better than they are now, but they're still afraid to even imagine something other than what they have. Now, if you're afraid to even dream, you will not be able to have the courage to even put together a vision, let alone follow it. Number 3 is to be methodical. Nothing good happens in chaos. So no matter what, and I always like to go back to this when I talk about chaos. The 5,000, the account of the feeding of the 5,000. If you go back to that account, you'll remember that Jesus set them down in hundreds, tens, and units so that you quantify, you group them. There were women, there were children. That's order. You can only prosper in order. So be methodical in the way you do things. And the 4th thing is that be passionate. One of the things you'd agree with me about Lucy is that she's been extremely passionate about the things that she's been involved in. And that passion is one of the things that makes John Quincy Adams' quote come to life. That if you're a person who can make other people believe more, do more, learn more, and become more, then you're a leader. And it is through the passion that you demonstrate in what you do that you're going to achieve that. The final thing is affirmation. The indirect exposure to leadership traits and the theory or the thought of being a leader started at home. Lucy's grown up. She has her own children, and she reminds them that they can be more. And so the more you affirm, the more you lend the right language to the vision, the easier it is to make it happen. And on that note, thank you again, Lucy, for joining me.
Thank you so much. I love that summary. I was just kind of writing it in my mind as you went along, so thank you.
I'm glad to have had you, and hopefully we can do a second part to this, because there's so much we could talk about that we haven't.
Absolutely.
And to the crew, thank you, and our friends at Villa Monticello, and to you watching us. We'll come back with more on the Executive Lounge. Go forward, make rain. Shalom.